Hello and welcome to Our Time. Here's a question. What does this woman and this woman have in common? Well, here's a clue with another question. Who was the first female police officer in the British Empire to earn the same salary as men, and in which city? Well, the answer is Lainie Anderson, Kate Cox, Adelaide, and they have in common a book loosely based on the policewoman's life, written by Lainie Anderson.
Thank you.
Welcome, Lainie.
Thank you.
For the third time.
I know.
Now, the first time we were talking about the Vickers Vimy.
We were, yes. I'd been on a Churchill Fellowship and written my first novel, Long Flight Home. And you very kindly had me on.
So that had a lot of research.
Yes.
And it also not so much saved the plane, but brought it to the attention of the public.
Yeah, so many of us worked hard for that in 2019 for the centenary of the flight. My Churchill Fellowship sort of helped to bring together lots of international opinion, and I used that to gauge the significance of that first flight across the world from England to Australia that was achieved by our South Australian Smith brothers in the Vickers Vimy at the airport. And then a whole heap of us got together and lobbied state and federal governments and also Adelaide Airport Limited, and ultimately we helped raise $7 million to have the plane moved, and now it's in that beautiful spot. I hope you've seen it, Malcolm.
I haven't been anywhere lately that I've flown.
Oh, you must
but
go.
Soon.
You
soon.
must go
and
and
I'm genuinely looking forward to that. Because when
brilliant.
I was a little boy, such a sad story, the Saturday afternoon trips with the new car used to be driving all over the place, and Dad would, on the odd occasion, take us to the Adelaide airport, and we would drive past that little bunker that it used to be in, and I'd look in there and think, how did that ever fly?
I know.
Canvas and wood. How did it ever fly?
And yet they got it from England to Australia at a time when there were basically no airfields after India.
Exactly.
Those guys were incredible.
And so cold it would have been flying, although they weren't flying at huge altitude.
No, but up to 11,000 feet.
Yeah, but they were also flying
in an open
through
cockpit.
winter. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the story is just fascinating.
It is.
But then we talked about something almost as fascinating but very important to all of us, which was the assisted dying bill that went through Parliament here.
Yeah, and suddenly that's 2021, like 3 years ago,
Isn't
Malcolm, can you believe? How
did you become involved with that? Was it because you were writing at the time for it, or?
No, well, I had been passionate about it for a long time, but funnily enough, a woman that I had worked with on the Epic Flight Centenary, so the Vickers Vimy Centenary, contacted me because she was going to start helping Voluntary Assisted Dying South Australia, the brilliant team of volunteers who have campaigned for decades about this. And she said, you want to come along and help with some media? And I didn't think it would entail too much. And then suddenly 6 months went by and it was a huge operation.
And you became passionate about it.
Really, really, lots of us did. And how fabulous that we were able to help politicians see the light, and we got it brought into law.
It's a funny thing about politicians, because people stand for politics, but they don't necessarily have a background in understanding all of the things they're supposed to know about. And obviously that's why they have advisors. But which advisor do you listen to? I
think in the end, I like to think about how absolutely influential Stephen Wade was, and he was obviously a member of the Marshall team, Marshall government. He was health minister, and his thoughts on it were, it's not necessarily something I would do myself, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't give other people the right. And that's what we had all been campaigning about for years. It's like, not everyone has to do it. It's voluntary. And
that's an important word, isn't it? Voluntary.
Absolutely, and it's so wonderful, Malcolm, that it's actually available now to South Australians, as it is across Australia. And it's
taken time for the other states as well.
It has,
that weren't at that time.
It has, and I actually sat with a woman as a witness. There's so many steps, of course, that need to be taken to safeguard the program, and it was very moving to sit with her and her two sons while she was going through the process of saying, yes, I want to take advantage of the law. And this beautiful man, a care navigator, was stepping her through it. And I was very proud and honoured to have been a part of it, Malcolm. And I take my hat off to the men and women who volunteered for years to get it passed.
Make it happen.
Yeah.
Well, then I've been following your career because I used to read your column in the Sunday Mail.
Yes.
Every week.
17 years, Malcolm.
I know.
Lordy.
I've sort of grown up with comments about your sons, your twin sons.
Now 21.
Amazing. But you've done so much more in your life. Just run us quickly through your life before we talk about this amazing book.
Okay, well, raised on beautiful York Peninsula, studied journalism here at McGill back in the 80s when dinosaurs roamed the earth. Worked at a few country newspapers but was determined to get to the Herald Sun and do politics. Did that for a while, moved to London, worked at the Times, came back here, worked at the South Australian Tourism Commission as PR manager, where I met my beautiful husband Max. Our boys were born. And then I started writing the column, and I started the column in 2007. In 2009, a Sunday Mail reader contacted me and asked me to do a story on the Vickers Vimy at the airport, and that sort of led to this whole new world of historical fiction writing for me.
Well, and that's what I loved about this book, that it's historical fiction based on real facts, real places, real Adelaide, real old Adelaide. Do you want to just run quickly through it? Well, no, before you do, it wasn't that long ago that we had, I'm not sure what his official title is, but the guy who looks after the collection at the police barracks in their museum there.
Yes, one of many. They're great down there.
They are fantastic.
They were fabulous when I was researching.
Well, that's when I first heard about her, because I knew nothing about her either. And that's a real shame that we don't learn very much about the history of our own state. But more particularly, the fact that she was the first woman in the British Empire that was awarded the same pay rate as men.
Yes.
Which they objected to.
Well, yes, some of them certainly did, but she would say that she was really well supported by her male officers. But the minute I heard that a woman called Fanny Kate Boadicea Cox became the first policewoman in the British Empire. She was born in Moonta, and I'm a York Peninsula girl, and I thought, there's my girl.
How does all that come together?
When I was looking for a female protagonist for my next book, I thought it had to be her.
I loved the fact that she changed her name to be more they had no other connotations to it and simplified everything.
Yes. She was a fascinating woman. I loved that she was a strict Methodist and a teetotaler, but she loved to shop and she loved to tie perm when perms came into fashion. But we should go back actually, Malcolm, and just say that it was in 1915 in Adelaide. At the age of 40 and unmarried, our Kate Cox became the first woman in the British Empire employed on the same salary and with the same powers of arrest as her policing officers. Yeah.
And I guess most of her work in those days was looking after, well, a combination of things like young women who had children, and she eventually had the children's home named after her.
Yeah, lots of people would remember her as the supervisor and creator of the Brighton Babies Home, which when she died became the Kate Cox Memorial Babies Home. But I focus on her life as a policewoman.
Yes.
And lots of people wouldn't know that she actually was a policewoman for 20 years before she retired at the age of 60 and then convinced the Methodist Church to create the home. Yeah, the home. Yeah, so I ultimately decided to, or not decided, but was lucky enough to do a PhD at University of South Australia, right here, on Kate Cox's life while I was exploring her life and writing the story, which was fabulous because,
Well, what I really enjoyed about the book, as I said before, was the fact that you've tied in real places in Adelaide, because it's about a woman whose body was found at the Glenelg Jetty with her face rubbing up against the pylons, so it made it difficult to know who she actually was. And as it's traced back through the book, there's a few red herrings that lead you to think, maybe
of course, it's a murder mystery.
Maybe it's the... And then in the end, it's a bit... I love the way you tied all that together, but you've got to read the book to find that out.
I would hope so.
Yes.
Yes, it's actually sort of history by stealth, I like to think of it, because my aim, as part of my PhD, was to write a murder mystery that still did justice to Kate Cox, and which meant that I had to be as true to her characteristics, her history, her known history, what the archive tells us, and also to the era in which she lived. So, and that's why the murder mystery itself is fictional, but there's lots of the real life cases that she solved are interwoven within the chapters, which take you on the journey.
But the journey was great because you've invented an offsider sort of thing, because everyone's got to have an offsider.
Absolutely.
That helps fill in the gaps in between, but it's the gaps in between all of that that puts everything into perspective that you've talked about, like the places into perspective, what was happening during the daytime, the making cups of tea in her office and so on. But also, I was just talking about this before, about Moors on the Square, because as a young man I remember Moors on the Square, and we're going to talk about more of that in just a moment. Welcome back to Our Time. Our guest is Lainie Anderson. There's really three of us in this conversation. This amazing woman here, whose name is...
Kate Cox.
But her whole name was...
Fanny Kate Boadicea Cox.
I know why she dropped the Boadicea.
Yes, and I think in those days, lots of people actually used their second name. Fanny was often, and in her case, it was her paternal grandmother.
A family name.
Yeah, so a family name.
And was Boadicea given, do you think, because she was someone who got out and made it happen?
Her father only learnt to read and write very late in life, when he actually met Kate's mother, so his wife to be, and she was a teacher, and she taught him how to read using history books, and he fell in love with history and called her Boadicea as a result.
How amazing.
I know.
How amazing.
Yeah,
just
so much great family history.
You look at that face, I'm just wondering, how old do you think she would have been there?
I think she was probably about 35. She was notoriously camera shy, so there aren't too many photos of her.
I did a bit of a search too. And
yeah.
I only really found this one, another one, and a group shot where she's considerably older.
I was very lucky that a relative of Kate's by the name of Liz Hilson here in South Australia, she was fabulous when I was doing my research, my PhD, and she gave me some photographs of her when she was younger, but there's only like another 3 of them.
Right.
So she was notoriously camera shy, and also I think she believed that as a police officer it wasn't her, it wasn't good for her to be photographed too much.
I understand that. Yes, because she, with your book, she had a bit of a reputation when people turned up. I love the stories of the young lovers laying by the Torrens or wherever she met people. Was it 3 feet apart? 3 feet apart?
Yeah, she had, one of her nicknames was 3 feet apart, was because that was what she called out when she actually struck people with her 5-foot cane.
Oh, yes, with a cane.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, she would do her night patrols with a 5-foot cane, and if young couples were canoodling in the Adelaide parklands or on the city beaches, and she thought they were a danger to themselves and to Adelaide's modesty, she would,
Well, of course, men were sent away to the Great War at that time. It's interesting because you mentioned in the book about women giving men who hadn't enlisted white feathers, and I've mentioned this before because during the Second World War, my dad was given white feathers. He worked on market gardens, so he was actually part of the food supply.
Right.
And because they hadn't enlisted, they're living in the Adelaide Hills growing stuff that was going off, but because they hadn't enlisted young able-bodied men in their early 20s, they were given white feathers. Did nobody realise what war really meant?
No, I know. And I think in the First World War in particular, women played an incredible role, and it wasn't until I started my PhD that I actually learned so much more about women, because understandably we focus on the 60,000 young Australian men who lost their lives in the war. But when you start looking into it, women just were incredible. The patriotic further here in South Australia, but not just the women who were so patriotic, and it was only the extremes who were handing out white feathers.
Yeah, sure.
At the other end, we had women who were marching in protest against the war and protesting for peace, and they were also very scorned by society. So incredibly brave to be out there protesting. But in the middle, we had these tens of thousands of women who, you know, worked for the Red Cross, volunteered for the Red Cross, the Comforts Fund. Everyone was knitting, everyone was baking, everyone was sewing buttons on street corners.
And making cakes and stuff to send away. Were they part, it was the Cheer Up Hut, where the Adelaide Festival Centre is now.
Yes.
It used to be the Cheer Up Hut.
Yes.
Where you could go, the men coming back from the war could go and
have
dance
a free
with
meal,
a woman and
have a free meal, and yes. So yeah, that was huge as well, and created here in South Australia. Do you know 14,000 care packages were sent to the troops every month by Australian women?
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, there were 369 Red Cross groups in South Australia alone. Yeah.
A history that we don't know about, and very sadly, the Police Barracks Museum is about to go to make way for Children's Hospital, which actually I think is such a shame. There must have been another way. And Keith Conlon, who's been on our program several times, it just seems a shame that we're losing our history. And I'm sure it'll be moved somewhere else, but it's funny, being in that old building that's part of the police barracks sort of makes it real to me.
Yeah, I would actually have loved to have seen the police museum, and I know that they're moving to a great new site on somewhere in the city, but I think the Adelaide Jail could just be turned into the most incredible
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
Tourist attraction for South Australia, and to have some of the police memorabilia and everything in there would be outstanding, I think. So maybe something for down the track.
Maybe. It's just something like this suddenly recreates in your mind as you're reading it. It recreates a time that we came from. Maybe not today's generation, maybe not actually our generation, but the generation before. And when you read something like this, and I know you did an enormous amount of research, but when you read something like that, it's genuinely, you've recreated what it must have been like to live in those times, with the morality of the way things were, with the fact that because there were a lot of men returning from the war, there were a lot of unwanted pregnancies and so on, the fact that in many ways the police were sort of a bit, cut and dried with everything, and didn't look at it from a female perspective, that in this book it comes very clear that's what she did.
Yeah, one thing that became really obvious to me was that even though luckily we have retained lots of bricks and mortar here in South Australia, but from a moral and a social standpoint, it was a completely different world, particularly for women. And I'll go back to Kate Cox holding a 5-foot cane and whacking young couples, which sounds like, whoa, that's crazy. But half of all babies conceived in the early 20th century in Australia were conceived outside of wedlock. So it was really, and birth control was very almost non-existent. Really. So it was one of the very few tools at her disposal to try and stop young women from getting into what was one of the most dire states.
Yes.
Yeah. So
it just wasn't socially acceptable.
No, and also from getting duty bound into marriages that were miserable because women had so few rights. Women were basically the legal possession of their father until they became the legal possession of their husband. They had no property rights. They had no rights to custody of their children.
Or
if they divorced or financial. Yeah, they even until 1914, a woman whose husband died didn't get guaranteed custody of her children. So it was
crazy,
it was completely different times. And Kate Cox and the Women's Police Branch, she ended up with 14 women working for her. they saw it very much their role as prevention. They were almost basically social workers, really, in lots of respects. Wasn't long before they did work on all criminal cases involving children and women, well before Scotland Yard actually. They were groundbreaking in that respect as well. But they really did see their role as trying to stop young women, because who were had so much more freedom because of the war. They were getting work and roles that they'd never got before. Well, because lots of businesses as well disincentivised work for men, and so we're putting women on to try and get men away fighting. Everyone was trying to force these poor young men away to their deaths.
All for the empire. Because of the women's movement here, that we had the first female vote here and first female politician here in South Australia. In Australia, I believe.
Did we? I thought we were really well behind, but
no.
That's above my pay grade. I know that we were the first place in the world to simultaneously grant women the right to vote, but also to run for Parliament.
To run for Parliament, I believe we had the first in Parliament as well. I could be wrong. I'm so well read, I've forgotten it all.
I'm not going to challenge you openly because it's your show, Malcolm.
There's a book. No, challenge me openly. Come on, let's have a bit of argy-bargy stuff.
Oh no, it was hard enough investigating.
How long did it take you to write this?
Well, it took a bit of a village because, of course, I was doing it as part of my PhD, so I had my supervisors and my agent, and then Hachette helping me with it. So probably sort of on and off 3 years, but I'm writing the second one as we speak, and that will probably take me about 9 months.
And we'll talk about that in a minute. This was her while she was older, this photograph that we have.
That was at her retirement at 9.
Right.
In 1935. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, she would have been nearly 60 there, so she's looking pretty good, isn't she?
Certainly, well, she was a good Methodist girl.
Better than me at 54.
Yes, alcohol didn't ever touch
Yeah, true.
Lips.
That's what the problem is.
We're going to be back in just a tick to tell you just a little bit more before we say goodbye to you and to Lainie. And welcome back to our time. Lainie Anderson, we've been talking about your book, this one here, which is a work of fiction based on real characters, real people.
Inspired by the real Kate Cox.
And Dora Black, is that a real story?
No, the overarching murder mystery is fictional.
Because you're writing another one in the same series.
Yes, the Petticoat Police Mysteries. The second one is set. Well, the murder.
So the Sherlock Holmes of Adelaide.
Exactly.
In a frock.
Exactly.
Very good.
Yes. Sort of a little bit the same, actually, a little bit left of centre, a little bit quirky.
Quirky's good.
Yeah.
The thing I loved about this story, though, was talking about Moors on the Square, which is now our law court here in South Australia in Victoria Square. When I was young, I remember going past that, and I've always thought that should have been a casino here because that's what it looks like on the outside.
It was perfect for me because I just love the fact that she loved to shop. That sort of became a bit of a theme in some of the bits I was reading about her. And the fact that she was in Landrowna Terrace, which is now where the SA Water is, opposite the Magistrates Court, and then you had Moors on the Square on the other side of the square, and she could basically walk out the door and pop across in her lunch break and pick up a pair of new kid gloves. And the saying was she liked to linger at counters, which I just love. So, yeah, basing the mystery around Moors on the Square was a perfect way to get to know that history, because my mum actually had her wedding photos displayed in Moors on the Square.
Oh, really?
Yeah, back in the 60s. And I was too young to remember it, but I know that it'll.
Well, her wedding photos, no. You were too young to remember?
No, Moors on the Square.
So it's something you need to tell us that she should have checked out?
I know that Moors on the Square will mean a lot to lots of South Australians. So, and I love that it's
all of the other things that you've mentioned, absolutely. And it's lovely that you were able to use so many people to help you that had historical knowledge of these things.
Oh yeah, the Police Historical Society. If anyone wants to look back on this sort of area of history, they're just fabulous. And of course, the State Library. You go hard to go better than what's there.
Thanks so much for writing the book. And thanks for coming in to talk about it, because it was great. I really loved it.
Malcolm, you're a joy. Thank you very much.
Oh, no, I'm a Malcolm, not a Joy. John's my second name. Sister's middle name's Joy. Oh, that's where you got it from. What rubbish. Till next time, folks, keep yourself nice. Thank you, Lainie.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.